Hey y'all, this is Esme. I normally come here and share a bit of my faith journey. Thank you for joining us. Today I wanted to talk about an aspect, a character, bring forth a characteristic of God so that we can all learn to know Him a little bit better. And as you can see from the topic, this is the subject of shame. Whether we know it or not, the subject of shame is a very big part of spiritual warfare. It's a really big part of any believer's life if they're ever going to conquer their life circumstances or the vicissitudes of life and actually be able to walk into the promised land as God intends for them to do. And we can see this even very early on in the Israelites' journey when they were told to move forward and possess the promised land. Why do we think they were fearful of that? It was because of shame, the shame of losing, the shame of failing, the shame of not becoming that which they were being called to rise to the levels of. That is a shame that can cripple us. And today I wanted us to look at a biblical basis of this shame to sort of understand what it's about, what it seeks to do and accomplish in us, or prevent us, more accurately prevent us from accomplishing. And then I want us to see that there's really no way around it. We must risk shame if we are going to become everything that we're supposed to become. And we will see this even from the very life of Jesus Christ. That we know it or not is besides the point. The question of shame looms large in our minds when it comes to us making the decision whether we're going to move forward and take risks versus just maintain the status quo of our lives. Excuse me, it's hay fever season, so I'm sneezing a lot more. I'm not sure why it's affecting me. It never did in my younger years. It never did until later in life, and also until I moved here to the US as opposed to being over in Europe. So I'm just trying to manage it best I can. I do take Claritin when it gets really bad. I will take Zartek or something. Let's first define the word. So shame is a deep sense of unworthiness, a sense of dishonor or exposure resulting from sin, failure, or separation from God. Shame goes beyond embarrassment. It is the spiritual and emotional weight that comes from being uncovered, guilty, or unclean in the eyes of a holy God. So scripturally, we could say that shame is the painful awareness of dishonor, guilt, or exposure caused by sin, often linked with a longing or a desire to be covered, restored, and made right with God. From learning the character of God in the Bible, we see that shame is not something that God is shy to handle. In fact, we see Bible verse after Bible verse, story after story of God stepping forward to cover our shame, stepping forward to make it right, stepping forward to make sure that we do not drown in shame, because He understands just how powerful the emotion of shame can be. It is so powerful that it will actually stop us from stepping into our destiny. That is why He then takes it upon Himself to dissuade us from the idea of hiding after falling into sin, to actually step forward and count on Him and believe that His mercy is sufficient, that His mercy is able to cover us completely, fully. So we'll start with the story of Adam and Eve. As usual, we try and use the law of first mention, so we try and start from the very beginning every time we can help it. When we look at the story of Adam and Eve, Genesis 3:21 tells us thus: the Lord made garments of skin for Adam and Eve and clothed them. So here we can see that they sinned. And as a result of that, they instantly knew that they were uncovered and they were ashamed of their nakedness. And we see God not leaving them to that shame. God did not leave them naked in it. He covered them. Such a beautiful act of mercy in the midst of judgment. God could have admonished them and turned them away without covering that shame, but He understood the dangers of shame and how, if you don't tame it, if you don't banish it, how it can stop you from stepping into your destiny. The next example we see is Cain and Abel. This is after Cain had murdered his brother Abel. And we see that the Lord put a mark on him. This is in Genesis chapter 4, verse 15 and 16. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. And so here we see that after murdering his brother, you can imagine the seriousness of such an act, because life is precious. Every life is precious. God has put so much good in every single life. There isn't a life that is disposable. And you can imagine that after such an act, yes, he was sent away, but God placed a mark on him, not a mark of shame, but a mark of protection, because remember, he was worried that if people found him, they would kill him. And God said, no, whoever kills you will suffer the consequences of that. So yes, we see judgment in that he's sent away, but we also see grace in that there's a mark put on him, a mark to cover him, a mark to make sure another didn't turn around and murder him, though he himself had murdered. Here, once again, we see God repaying us not for that which we deserve, but acting by his grace and mercy to cover our sin, to cover our shame. There's always justice, but it's always covered with mercy. There was justice for Adam and Eve. They did get judgment from what they had done, but God still covered their shame. He still put skin around them to cover them. And now we see the same happening with Cain. He has murdered his brother, and God is still putting a mark on him to cover him. Next, we look at the story of Noah and his drunkenness. This is after he has come from the ark, and he's planted a vineyard, and he decides to enjoy of the fruit of the vineyard. So in Genesis 9:23, we read that when his son Ham found him naked, while he did not behave appropriately, he called in his brothers, Shem and Japheth, and these two had the decency to walk in backwards and then put a cloth over their father to cover his nakedness, to cover his shame. This paints a picture of covering shame, not exposing it, a foreshadow of how love covers over a multitude of sins, as we see in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. Another good example is found in Luke 15, verse 22, and this is the story of the prodigal son. He tells his father, I want my inheritance right now so I can go out into the world and make my own way. I think you remember in the previous lesson we learned about self-sufficiency versus God's sufficiency. And so this son had decided, I want to be self-sufficient. I want to go away from the father's house. It's reminiscent of someone's story that I know, yours truly. It's very easy to find ourselves in the story of the prodigal son. And he goes off and squanders his wealth, and now he has to come back home. And now he has to come back home to his father's house. Verse 22 reads thus, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. He came home dirty, broken, ashamed. But the father didn't let him stay in that state. He clothed him in honor, restoring both his identity and his dignity. Remember, he came back saying, I'll just be like one of the servants. And the father said, my son has come home. The father still called him my son. Oh, if humans could learn to treat other humans how God treats us. His forgiveness is true, thorough through and through. He did not relegate him to the position of a servant, and he instead still ended up calling him son. He didn't even wait to hear his explanation, didn't give it any credence. He just said, my son is home. Let's feast. And then he put a robe on him, he put a ring on his finger, he put sandals on his feet, all of which means something. This is all symbolic, and we're going to see that in the near future. Next, in the book of Mark, chapter 5, from verse 33, we read the story of the woman with the issue of blood. Because of her condition, according to the laws of Israel, she was unclean. But she was so desperate for healing that she went and touched the garment of Jesus so that she could be healed. You can imagine that this would have definitely been frowned upon in that day and age and at that time. If you're unclean, you're supposed to go and sit by yourself until a time when you were clean. But when she did this, Jesus did not rebuke her. Instead, her shame was removed and her identity affirmed. Jesus actually stopped and called her daughter. And then he restored both her health and her honor. That is how God deals with our shame. I don't see a case where he leaves it uncovered or unattended to. He makes sure to put things back into their proper perspective so that we can pick ourselves up and keep walking on this journey that he has put us on. The next story is that one of the adulterous woman found in John chapter 8 from verse 10. She had been brought out publicly ashamed. She was supposed to be stoned. Forget the man who had done that with her, the adultery. It was just the woman who was being punished for it. So there she was, ready to be stoned. Then Jesus extends his mercy to her. Jesus covers her with mercy, not denying her sin, but silencing the shame. Her shame was confronted with mercy. That is what the Father does. Another teaching is found in the Old Testament, this time in Zechariah. Chapter 3, verse 3 to 4 reads, Take off his filthy clothes, See, I have taken away your sin, and I will put fine garments on you. So here we are given a glimpse into a powerful vision, a heavenly courtroom scene. Joshua, the high priest, is standing before the angel of the Lord, and here he's wearing filthy clothes. Now, this is not the same Joshua as the Joshua that allotted Israel's inheritance to the tribes. This is a different Joshua. This is a high priest. He appeared in the post-exilic times during the Babylonian exile. He was the high priest during the rebuilding of the temple under the leadership of Governor Zerubbabel. He served around 538 to 520 BC during the time of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah. You can find his story in the book of Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah. So in this vision, he's standing before the angel of the Lord and he's wearing filthy clothes. Not just dirty, but actually spiritually filthy. These garments represented the guilt and shame of not just his own sins, but also the sins of the people he represented, the people he stood for. Satan, the accuser, never far, he's there too, pointing the finger, highlighting the filth, the dirt, making his case basically. But God doesn't give Satan the last word. Instead, he rebukes the enemy and says something remarkable. Take off his filthy clothes. See, I have taken away your sin, and I will put fine garments on you. This wasn't just about clean clothes. This was about grace. It was God saying, I see your shame, and I'm not leaving you in it. I am covering it. I am restoring you. I'm putting dignity back on you. You also notice that Joshua didn't defend himself. He didn't try to earn forgiveness. He stood still and God did the covering. And that's the heart of the gospel, you know. We come before God with nothing but our guilt and our brokenness. And He meets us with robes of righteousness. Just like Joshua, we are brands that are plucked straight from the fire, rescued, not ruined. Not because we got it all right, no, but because God is merciful. So when shame tries to cling, when the enemy tries to remind you of what you did or who you used to be, remember this: God has already taken off the filth and He has dressed you in grace. So looking at that verse, so now that we have the context, let's read the verse again. It says, take off his filthy clothes. See, I have taken away your sin, and I will put fine garments on you. This is a direct image of God, removing the shame of sin and covering someone with his righteousness. The same thing he did for us through his sacrifice on the cross. That is the kind of God we serve. All right, another one, number 8, we're going to look at Peter, and this is found in John 21, verses 15 to 17. We can see that Peter went from denial to restoration. And you can imagine the shame he must have felt, being so zealous for the Lord, being the most outspoken, being the one that is quickest to obey, to rush, to judge, to become, to defend, and then to fall from such grace at the moment when it mattered the most. Jesus still appears to him after that and says, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And he says it 3 times to restore him, because Peter denied him 3 times. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. It would have been very easy for Peter to feel, I'm not worthy. I failed my Lord. I'm just going back to the only thing I know, fishing. And in fact, he did that. This is where the Lord came to find him and said, do you love me? Feed my sheep. What level of restoration is this? What manner of love is this? After denying Jesus 3 times, Peter is not discarded. He is still useful for the master. His vessel is still needed of the master. So instead, Jesus restores him. He doesn't just restore him, but he does it publicly. And then he commissions him yet again. Such is the love of the Father. Such is the love of the God that we serve, that there is nothing you can do that he cannot cover with his mercy. And not to abuse grace or anything, but to not let shame bury you. Do not let the enemy, like we saw in the scene of Joshua, the high priest in the courts, that it is the enemy's pleasure to point out your faults. It is his pleasure to keep saying how you're not worthy. And then it is up to you to surmount that by scripture. Use the very Zechariah verse to speak back to the enemy and say, you will not bury me in shame, because the Father has given me robes of righteousness. Another good example we find is in the book of Isaiah chapter 6, verse 7 to 8. Here Isaiah is overcome by shame, by feelings of unworthiness, nothing that is strange to us. This happens from time to time, where you feel that I'm failing God. It calls to mind this song, God, Don't give up on me yet. We all struggle with feelings of I am failing and I'm falling short and I ought to be further than I am. I know I struggle with this a lot. I ought to be further along than I am right now. So Isaiah was going through these same feelings of unworthiness. This Isaiah verse is one of the most powerful moments of cleansing, calling, and commission in the Bible. The passage takes place in a vision that the prophet Isaiah receives, where he sees the Lord seated on the throne, high and exalted, with seraphim, which are angelic beings, surrounding him and crying, "Holy, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." And in the presence of such holiness, Isaiah became painfully aware of his own sinfulness. "Woe to me," he says, "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." And then we see the seraphim, the angelic being, taking a coal from the altar, touching it to Isaiah's lips, which is a sign of purification. This action cleanses Isaiah and removes his guilt and sin. And only after he is cleansed does he then hear God's voice. "Whom shall I send?" In response, and without hesitation, now that his heart is purified, Isaiah responds, "Here I am, Lord, send me." We notice that Isaiah didn't necessarily compare himself to anybody else. He is undone by God's standard. Why? Because holiness will always reveal what human pride conceals. We also notice that Isaiah is cleansed before he is called, before he gets commissioned, which means that grace comes before calling. God doesn't use us because we are perfect. He prepares us and he cleanses us by his grace. And once Isaiah's guilt is taken away, he doesn't hide. He volunteers. So grace doesn't just clean up, it actually sends out. True forgiveness will always empower bold action, a bold response. This moment also foreshadows the work of Christ. Just as the call from the altar touched his lips and took away his guilt, Jesus, who is the ultimate sacrifice, touches our lives and takes away our sin. So before Isaiah could speak for God, he had to be purified by God. And once his shame was covered, then and only then was his heart free to say yes. So we can see that not only was his guilt removed, but he was also graced with a mission. That is how God works. And now the last example we're going to see is in the book of Galatians chapter 3 verse 27. And it reads, "For all of you who are baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ." So here we see that believers are clothed in Christ. We're not clothed with our good works. We are not clothed with our strength, with our perfection, with our might. We have none of those. Our clothing is Christ. He is our ultimate covering, Jesus himself. We're not just forgiven, we're actually clothed in his righteousness. So as we can see, from Eden to the cross, from garments of skin to robes of righteousness, Scripture repeatedly shows the truth that God doesn't leave us in our shame. He covers us. He covers us with love, he covers us with his mercy, and he covers us with himself. This, my friends, is the heart of the gospel. Not just that we're forgiven, but that we are restored. I'm a testimony to that. Bye.